Hi, I'm here at Pearl Harbor with Mr. Jimmy Lee, who is an 11-year-old boy when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. He's going to help me explore the sites around Oahu. To answer our next question, how did the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor?
Well, let me tell you, when I was living here, all I know is that the planes came over the treetop. You know, being an 11-year-old kid, hey, that was something. That was really something. And today, when you look at this place here, I mean, it's nice and calm. But you know, 75 years ago, let me tell you, this was heck. I mean, with the planes coming in, the bombing, the fire, the smoke, the gunfire, that was really something.
So it sounds like what you witnessed really stuck with you. What was Hawaii like before the attack?
Well, you know, before the attack, there was a lot of planes, you know, like an everyday thing. Mm-hmm. You know, we had maneuvers and we had ships going in and out there. We did nothing like that. And then when it happened, oh, I tell you, I was so curious, I just ran out there and, you know, took a look and saw what the attack was like. But there's more I want to show you after a while when we get over to the other areas. See that island in the middle of the harbor? That's Fort Island. The United States Navy found that island to be the perfect place to tie up its big battleship. I think that's a good place to start our exploration. Julia, we're now at the Pacific Aviation Museum, Pearl Harbor. And we'll be joined by the museum educator, Ford Ebesagawa.
Hi. My friend Eliana back at the National World War II Museum learned all about why the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. So I'm supposed to find out how.
Well, you've come to the right place. But we have to start before December 7th. The planning in Japan for the attack occurred months in advance. So why don't we learn more about the Japanese strategy?
On November 26, 1941, 6 aircraft carriers left Japan, taking a route across the northern Pacific, headed for Hawaii, and the United States Pacific Fleet anchored there. By December 7th, the Japanese attack force was about 230 miles northwest of Hawaii. It was a Sunday morning when their attack began. Soon after sunrise, the first wave of Japanese planes took off from the decks of their aircraft carriers to begin their attack on Pearl Harbor. Many U.S. servicemen and residents on Oahu were just starting their day when the attack began without warning. You guys voted on what you wanted to see to tell the story further. Let's check out what you selected. So it looks like the students chose the Japanese Wreckage Zero. Could you tell us what kind of plane this was?
Well, this is Mitsubishi Zero. Again, it was a fighter aircraft. This Zero was piloted by Airman First Class Shigenori Nishikaichi. And Nishikaichi's responsibility that Sunday morning was to provide fighter cover and strafing attacks. Apparently, Nishikaichi's aircraft was struck by ground fire, and he began losing fuel. In fact, he began losing fuel at such a rate, he realized that he could not fly back to his carrier, which was over 250 miles north of the island. So Nishikaichi elected to crash land on the tiny Hawaiian island called Niihau.
Did the pilot survive?
Nishikaichi did survive, and the native Hawaiian islanders that resided on the island, they had no idea what had just happened at Pearl Harbor. So they assumed that Nishikaichi was just a wayward pilot that just happened to crash land on their island. So when they helped him out of that aircraft, they literally treated him as a guest. In fact, they held a luau for him that evening.
Wow. So what did he do with the plane afterwards that it looks like this?
Well, because the Japanese Zero was a top secret aircraft, he did not want the aircraft to fall in enemy hands, the Americans. So Nishikaichi attempted to burn the aircraft.
Wow.
After a few days later, some of the Hawaiian Islanders were able to pick up on the radio what exactly happened at Pearl Harbor. So they kind of put two and two together and kind of figured Nishikaichi must be an enemy pilot. So they put him under guard. But Nishikaichi was able to obtain a handgun, and he literally tried to take over the island.
Wow.
And one of the Hawaiian Islanders that he attempted to take hostage defended himself and ultimately killed Nishikaichi. And military historians believe that this was one of the first land engagements between the United States and Japan on American soil.
So Jimmy, do you remember seeing any of these kind of planes flying overhead?
Oh yes, sure did. But let's go outside where we can explain and see it a little better.
So Hangar 79 was damaged during the attack and is now part of the Pacific Aviation Museum. Could you tell us a little about it?
You're correct. In fact, if you look on the hangar windows there, it still bears the scars of that December 7th morning, the bullet holes on the windows. Mm-hmm. Hangar 79 at the time of the attack was a maintenance and engine repair facility. So you can pretty much imagine this hangar was probably filled with aircraft that were based out of Pearl Harbor at the time. But rather than hear me talk, why don't we go inside and let's meet somebody that was actually here on the attack.
Okay. I'm so honored to be with all of you today. Thank you.
Yeah, let me introduce these distinguished gentlemen. My immediate left is Eddie Young, Ian Burney, and Dick Girocco.
So how did you guys feel when you saw all the planes flying overhead or the ships on fire? Like, how did that stick with you?
I was 6.5 and had just started first grade. And I was out playing in the yard that Sunday morning, and I saw some airplanes, and we had never seen an airplane where we lived. My father was concerned when he heard the shells nearby, so he pushed me back in the house, and we listened to our old Philco tabletop radio, and there was a local radio personality named Webley Edwards who kept repeating, "This is the real McCoy, we are under attack. This is the real McCoy."
It was a beautiful Sunday morning, and I got out of my house and grabbed my old hand-me-down bicycle, and I looked out in the sky, and all of a sudden I saw this Japanese Zero flying overhead, and my neighbor was next to me. I nudged him, and he was about 23 years old. I was 9, and I told him, "Mr. Milamai, that's a Japanese Zero, because we draw planes at school, and I know that's a Zero." And he said, "No, that's one of ours, Eddie." And finally he looked up and he saw the rising sun under the wings. And later, as I looked toward Pearl Harbor, when the Zero passed over, he went to Pearl, and I saw all the flak in the air. So I knew this was the real thing. In a few minutes, I saw a big plume of smoke go up, went up 200 feet. It was not black, it was red. That was the Arizona, and eventually it turned black.
How about you? How did you feel?
Well, to begin with, I was in the Navy, and I was in a squadron of PBY Catalina flying boats. We were based here on Ford Island in Hangar 54, which is the next one over from this one. What got our attention first was the noise the dive bombers were making coming down on our seaplane ramp. And we thought it was the Army Air Corps playing tricks on us. They used to come by on occasion and dive bomb us and drop flour sacks on us. So we all run out to front of the hangar and looked up. Didn't realize instantly that they were Japanese. Of course, when they released their bombs, they didn't look like flour sacks. And of course, when they pulled on their dives, they could see the red circle on the wings. Then it was a matter of self-preservation, get under cover somewhere. And there was no cover at all. So as luck would have it, they were putting a pipeline of some sort in out here between the hangars and the runway. And they hadn't put the pipe in it yet. So we all got in that, and basically we were practically underground. So basically what I remember the most was the noise and the concussions. After about an hour, everything stopped. Second wave come over after about 15, 20 minutes. So when that happened, back in the ditch for another hour.
So was there any moment during that morning when you really realized that your life was going to be different?
When nightfall came, then everyone in the neighborhood was shaking and being afraid that we don't know whether they landed troops or not. And there were rumors about paratroopers going up to the reservoir and putting poison in the water. So everybody started filling their bathtubs with drinking water.
We were out of school for a couple of weeks, and I still have an ID issued by the territory on January 7th, 1942, which coincides with when I was fingerprinted and given an ID and issued a gas mask. And I carried that gas mask throughout the war.
So thank you all so much for sharing your stories with me, and thank you for your service to the country.
You're very welcome.
Julia, this is another beautiful spot on Pearl Harbor, and we can learn of the attack in Oahu. Right here is the Battleship Missouri Memorial. And out there in the harbor is the USS Arizona Memorial. Under that memorial is the sunken remains of the Arizona and her men. 75 years ago, this area on Cloud Island was called Battleship Row, where U.S. battleships were lined up on the morning of December 7th.
Battleship Row was one of the Japanese pilots' primary targets. Some dropped specially designed torpedoes that tore huge holes into ships below the waterline. Some dropped bombs onto the decks of the ships, producing giant explosions. The U.S. sailors headed to their battle stations in a brave effort to down Japanese planes, but did little damage to the enemy. By the time the attack was over, all 8 U.S. battleships were either heavily damaged or sunk.
Long may our land be bright.
And more than 2,400 servicemen, mostly U.S. Navy sailors, had been killed. A further 1,200 people were wounded.
The deadliest attack that day came when a 1,760-pound bomb was dropped onto the deck of the USS Arizona. It struck the ship's magazine, where the Arizona's ammunition was stored. A massive explosion ripped through the forward part of the ship and created a huge fireball, killing 1,177 of the crew on board. Half of the loss of life at Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941 came on the Arizona.
Wow, that is so sad. This place is so beautiful. I can't even imagine that all that destruction happening 75 years ago. Did the Japanese attack anywhere else that day?
Oh yes, not only over Pearl Harbor, but over at Hickam. And as I look up towards the mountainside up there, planes were attacking there too. And in front of me, they were attacking out there in a place called Eva. And of course, on the other side of the island, several other bases were hit too.
The explosion from the USS Arizona was huge. Could you see it from where you were?
Oh yes, I could see it real clearly, and I tell you, it was something that you'll never forget. But when we get to the other side, we can go somewhere else and I can show you a better view. Here in this fish pond, this is where I grew up.
So what were you doing up here on the morning of the attack?
I grew up on a farm right here, and that morning I was feeding the pigs. That's my job. Look at that coconut tree. See how high it is? Well, that plane just came over our pig pen, just that high. When I looked up there were hundreds of planes, flying, and it was so fascinating to me. I never saw so many planes in all my life.
So were you scared when you realized that it wasn't a show and that it was Hawaii being under attack?
No. Was I scared? The answer is no. It was exciting. It was so interesting.
So did you and your family hide after they realized it was Japanese?
Well, we watched for about over an hour and a half. And that's when the loudspeakers come by and they said, hey, we're at war. We've been bombed by the Japanese. You know what we did? We took off up into the mountains up there, up in the valley, hid out in the caves. Then we came back home and the attack was over. Less than 3 hours was over. And one of the things that happened that afternoon, of course, was martial law came in effect. And with martial law, we had curfews, we had rationing and everything else. But then from that day on, it was fear. Mm-hmm. It was fear.
Although Jimmy was unharmed, 68 civilians were killed during the attack. Neighborhoods like this one were damaged by enemy fire. Take this house right across from Wheeler Army Airfield. An off-target Japanese bomb landed right in their yard. The attack changed the lives of servicemen and women as well as civilians at Pearl Harbor. I wonder if it had the same effect on Americans on the mainland. Let me text Eliana to see if she can find out for me.